Coming up on Regarding Men, The Queen's Gambit, a fairy tale.
Hey friends, welcome to another episode of Regarding Men, where we hold men in high regard and where red pill isolation comes to die. Welcome. I'm Janice Fiamengo, and I'm joined by my two favorite men's advocates, Tom Golden.
Very good.
And Paul Elam. I was waiting for that, Tom.
Most of them.
And today we are discussing a very popular, in fact, I think it's the most popular Netflix movie or miniseries to date, called The Queen's Gambit. And it is about a chess prodigy. It traces the development of a chess prodigy from youth until a point of victory. And it focuses on a little girl named Beth Harmon, from the time that she is placed in an orphan asylum sometime in the 1950s to the time in the late 1960s, I believe, when she overcomes all her demons and all her chess adversaries and defeats the number one ranked Russian player, whose name is Vasily, forgotten his last name. Something Borgov, Vasily Borgov. It's a story loosely based on a novel by a fellow named Walter Tevis. And he has said that he had certain actual chess players in mind, most significantly among them Bobby Fischer, the American chess prodigy, who eventually beat Boris Spassky in a famous game that was pitched as a kind of showdown between American democracy and Soviet communism. So there's that in the background. And there's a lot of interesting stuff to say about that background too, and the way in which the show depicts America in the 1950s and 60s and Soviet communism and everything else. So this is a story about a young girl from a very disadvantaged background overcoming various obstacles in her life. The main obstacle is that from the time she was a little girl at the orphanage, she becomes addicted to pills. I don't know what they are exactly, tranquilizers or sedatives. And a little later in life, she also develops a drinking problem. And this is in some way associated with her genius and her chess obsession and the particular kind of mentality that she has that makes it possible for her to be so good at chess. But she overcomes all of these things. So this is a story of triumphant overcoming of difficulties in life, and it's supposed to be a chronicle of the inspiration of the human spirit or something like that. And it is a fairy tale in many ways. The final scene shows her defeating the number one Russian chess player. And there's this wonderful moment where she realizes that she has won the game, and he's looking over the chessboard and he realizes there's nothing he can do to prevent her from winning. And so he concedes very gracefully and says, take it. The game is yours. And he passes along to her his king, and then ultimately they embrace, and that's almost the final scene of the movie. And there's so many things to say about it. I guess I'll end this introduction just by saying that we're going to subtitle this discussion a fairy tale. And this is a fairy tale, and there's different types of fairy tales, of course. And I would say a good fairy tale is one that tells us in a very memorable form some kind of truth about human experience, about the confrontation with evil, about what is involved in growing up and becoming an adult, about human sexuality, about various things. In this case, I think what we have is a bad fairy tale, although certainly very attractively told and containing some kernels of truth and certainly a very absorbing story. But I think it's a bad fairy tale in that it doesn't tell us a fundamental truth about human nature. It lies to us about aspects of human nature and the human experience. So in that way, I actually think it's, I don't know, maybe dangerous is probably too strong a word, but a false fairy tale for our times. So and with that, let's talk about it.
I don't have any problem with the fictional aspect of it, and we do need to point that out, I think, probably a couple of times. This is fiction we're talking about. None of this ever happened, nor in reality could it ever happen, as we'll go into in part of this discussion. I was reminded of the wonderful, just emotionally charged story of all the legions of women that stormed the beaches of Normandy, and the thousands of women that got together and built the pyramids, and the women that landed us on the moon and walked on the moon. No, just kidding. Actually, this level of fairy tale this is. And I've got to criticize a couple of things coming out of the gate. They wanted to set this up as an oppression versus the dominant patriarchy idea.
Right.
But they ran into a couple of complications, and their first shot at that was the most awkward shot that I think occurred in the whole series, and that was when the custodian of the orphanage that she lived at started teaching her how to play chess. One, we have a male mentor at play there, which probably shouldn't fit into this feminist narrative. And then the male mentor goes out and tells a high school teacher that he's found this prodigy. And the high school teacher comes to meet her and invites her to play against the entire class of boys in the chess club at the high school, and then gives her a doll. Was it just me, or did that just feel like that was tacked on in there just to make the point? Because I'm trying to imagine a couple of grown men finding a real prodigy in chess, somebody they thought was, or let's say if she was a prodigy at playing the piano or something else equally gifted, would you bring that person a doll regardless of their sex? I think not. I think they just threw that in there just to make the guys look chauvinistic. And of course, when they brought her to the school, they have this one really wonderful scene where all the boys come into the class, they're about to play her, and they lined up like a united front at the head of the class, looking at her condescendingly. And then, of course, they sit down and play with her, and everybody's happy. This was an attempt to create a narrative out of an implausible story, which is why I support Janice's contention. This is not a well-constructed fairy tale. There's no great moral lesson in this, because all they do is deal in fabricated stereotypes all the way through. There's very little nuance to any of the characters.
I thought that was a really interesting point there that you're making, Paul, about, because what I think is happening in this story is that two versions of feminist narrative are clashing throughout the whole piece, which is like 7 episodes long, as most people probably know. So it's a mini series. But on the one hand is the harsh feminist narrative where you have the young girl growing up into a young woman, battling the patriarchy and having to deal with all the obstacles that living in a patriarchal society allegedly puts in her way. And that includes the sexism of the men that she comes into contact with, their contempt for her, their condescension, their belief that she can't really be as good as she thinks she is, or as they've been told, that kind of thing. But then there's a softer feminist story at the same time, which is of the men falling in line and doing the appropriate thing, recognizing her genius and being pleased about it, and being willing to mentor a young girl and being willing to promote her and to praise her when they recognize her genius. And I think that what you're noting is that these two stories, neither of which tell the truth about human experience or are in any way subtle or complex keep clashing in the story because it wasn't quite sure often which sort of feminist story it wanted to be. And ultimately, I think it turns out to be one of the gentler feminist stories where most of the guys actually come off looking pretty good. They're supportive of her, they're kind to her, she's got an awful lot of male friends, more male friends than female, and they behave like gentlemen in most of the important scenes. There are a few contradictions to that, but it ends up being that happy feminist story where men acknowledge the woman's superiority.
I think you're right, and I find it really interesting that she wasn't even raped once during the entire 7-part series. I was waiting for it to happen because
although the suggestion is that her mother might have been.
Yes,
right, her mother might have been. I mean, that's one of the classic, the nasty feminist story about the nasty man sort of comes in with her mother, because the suggestion is that her mother was, if not raped, at least seduced by a very callous man who was already married, had his own life, discarded her after she became pregnant, refused to deal with her when she went to him saying, look, I'm at the end of my rope. I'm going mad. I don't know how to look after my daughter. And he just said, get out of here. And right after that, the mother tried to kill herself and her little girl. And of course, that's all his fault because he was such a terrible man. But that narrative doesn't really serve the purposes of the story overall. So it's pretty much in the background.
Yeah, I think the designation as a fairy tale is a really good one, because it's got to be a fairy tale. There's never been a female chess world champion. Never. Yeah. In fact, most of the best chess players in the world are men. If you look at the listing of the top 100, I think it's 102 chess players in the world, here's a list of it. And I put orange around the one woman that's there, and this is a lady who is number 86. I don't know how to pronounce her name, Yafan Hao or something like that. But 86, I mean, there are no female chess champions. I mean, there is actually a female chess league, World Chess League, where there are female champions of the world in the females. But why would they do that? Why would they need a league of their own?
Yeah. Well, this is part of the.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, this is, this falls in this program falls into the feminist category of wish fulfillment, where the belief is that if you simply tell enough stories with the outcome that you want, and in which women occupy the top positions that in traditionally masculine areas of achievement, if you just tell enough stories, it will eventually come true. Yeah. And, I think that is dangerous in itself, actually. Again, maybe dangerous is no, I don't think it is, actually. I do think that is dangerous. I think a lot of people watching this series are going to believe that it's actually a biopic, that it must be based on a real woman. In fact, it was based on, various male characters, but he just happened to make it a woman because, of course, he knew that his book would probably sell a lot better if it had a female chess champion. Yes. So a lot of people will think this must be based on a real person, or at least a composite person, a number of women who did things very similar to what our heroine does. And I think that's a recipe for more female disgruntlement. Yes. And more female belief that
the world is just oppressing them. Right, Janice?
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, and what's really
Am I frozen?
You were for a while.
You see the same thing play out in all the efforts of feminists to recruit for STEM. It's like, if we don't have a female chess champion, we'll manufacture one so that little girls can believe that. And then we have all this protest after protest after protest about women being treated poorly in the STEM fields and not having access to the STEM fields, and never once looking at the reality that women, on average, that's not where their aptitudes lie. And number two, very much it's not where their interests lie for the most part.
Exactly.
So this is why you have thousands of gender studies graduates squeaking and squawking about no women in STEM, but they're not going into STEM themselves. They just made a profession out of telling stories.
Out of squawking.
Exactly like this story.
Yes, exactly. Call out the IQ chart. Call out the IQ chart. And there it is, folks. I mean, this is the IQ chart for men and women. And you can see the women are clustered near the middle, which is fine. The men are more spread out. So once you get into the genius area, there's many more men. Once you get into the area of retardation, there's also more men. So, I mean, this is one of the reasons why there's never been a female chess champion, is because if you look at people who are in the genius level, it's mostly men. I think it's like at 130, it's 1 in 5 as a woman. At 150, it's like 1 in 15 or something like that. I forget what the numbers are, but it's something like that. And the higher you go up to 170 and 190 and above, the fewer women are there. And, you know, this to me...
people who think that's a sexist interpretation, just like Tom said, on the other end of the bell curve, you've got prisons just chock full of unintelligent, violent men who are on that lower end of the IQ spectrum. And that's just the way it is. We can squawk about it or try to entice women into STEM, and which they've done and failed at for 2 decades now in earnest. We can do that all we want, and it's not going to change the fact that if you want an engineering major, they're probably going to be male.
Yes.
Yeah, and enticing women into these various areas and pumping out narratives like this one that say that women can, you know, be anything they want to be, and, you know, including in these very highest elite levels of endeavor, it means that women fall back on that narrative of oppression even more energetically and more angrily and more bitterly, because it doesn't turn out that way when they set their minds to doing something, or you know, they can't believe that they don't sail along simply because they've wished to do so.
And the whole IQ thing, I think, plays out in not just chess, but in things like CEOs. I mean, you got to be pretty smart to be a CEO. And so there's probably going to be more males who are of that IQ than there are females. So it would just...
Politicians.
Well, yeah, maybe.
Well, and even with the stupidity of politicians, these guys they're sharks, and they're really, on average, they're very intelligent.
It's true.
In politics.
It's true.
It isn't even just intelligence, but it's the other qualities that, you know, it's the single-mindedness often that tends to be a masculine feature. It's the ability to put 18 hours every single day into obsessing over whatever that particular thing happens to be, that as a man you're totally focused on. There are some women like that. Nobody denies that, and nobody, you know, wants women not to have the opportunity to succeed, but they are a tiny minority compared to the many men, or the significant number of men who do have that ability.
Testosterone.
Yeah, exactly.
Drives men to do that. You just keep trying. And it's this testosterone that's got this strive for status stuff that pushes men in that direction, particularly men who are really, really intelligent. You know, boom.
And it's interesting how they put that characteristic very definitely into Harmon, the lead character for Queen's Gambit. She was insanely driven. She couldn't take defeat. She had to win.
Right.
And that's what drives, I would guess, a lot of chess champions. It's just it's just too unlikely that would be female.
Yeah, you've got to be driven in order to succeed at that level. I mean, it's just crazy level, you know?
Yeah. And I just,
the thing that men are driven like that, it's patriarchy. And,
that's exactly right. And toxic masculinity.
Yeah.
Yes.
You know, let a man be like that, and he's, you know, shit on, you know, for being toxic. Let a woman be like that, and she's Go, girl.
It's wonderful.
Like,
Well, that's the thing that
God.
that's what really bugged me about the movie too. Like if it had been an actual, I mean, there was one woman I think in history, Judith Polgar, a
Yes, yes.
Hungarian woman, who went way up. She never
Number
got to be
8, I
number
think.
one,
She got up
but she
to
did
8.
make it number 8 at one point.
Yes,
She
she did.
retired quite early, and in many ways well, she isn't the sort of prototype of the female who overcomes all obstacles, but she was somebody who was obviously very brilliant and very driven. But the thing is, so I wouldn't object to a biopic about a woman like her, and I wouldn't even object to a fantastical story about a woman chess genius, but it's all made to look relatively easy, and worse than that, even like sort of like so glamorous and romantic in this particular story.
Yes.
I can't imagine a similar story about a male chess genius. It would be a flop too. And that's the other reason why this is, I think, a bad version of a fairy tale, because like everything that she does comes naturally to her, and she never once loses that pure, fragile beauty that is so striking about her. Even the episodes where she is shown dealing with her pill and alcohol addictions, I didn't find they were at all realistic. They're, like she's falling down drunk occasionally, but it doesn't in any way, she never gains a pound. Her face doesn't, pardon me?
She's looking hot.
She's looking hot all the time. Yeah, and
in the Hollywood vernacular, she's always fuckable
she sure is.
Until it's over.
Well, maybe even more so, because she fits into a certain category of feminine beauty, which is often promoted both within Hollywood and actually in feminist circles. And it's the woman who doesn't care about men, the woman who, she's cold. She's self-obsessed, but always in a kind of attractive way. There's a moment in the film where one of the men says to her, I think you broke my heart. And she says to him, I do that, with a bit of a smile. And that's wonderful. Oh, wow. That's so entrancing. If it were a man doing that, breaking women's hearts, utterly, really incapable of caring or having a genuine reciprocal relationship, that would be portrayed as a real problem that he had to overcome. It's never a problem for her. It never stops any of her male lovers from continuing to love her. Of course, she has a lesbian relationship as well, just to check all the boxes. And she's never presented as actually having to struggle with any demons, which is exactly what you expect from this sort of a story. You would expect the hero, like he has to overcome external obstacles. He's going to have to overcome his inner demons. He's going to have aspects of himself that he has to surmount or struggle with in order to become the champion. She never really has to do that. I mean, yes, she has to overcome her addictions, but she seems to do that really quite easily.
I think you got a real point there, Janice, because this is just something that is so critical to storytelling, is that your hero needs to have a fatal flaw that they confront and overcome. And she never, it was like, oh, I'm not drinking this scene, so I'll turn down the drink. No withdrawal symptoms, no jitters, no anything. And then, of course, she's drinking and drugging again without huge negative effects on her.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
So they played her as sort of this also unrealistically pristine character, pristine hero for a story that just ends up not being well told because of that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's what
they also portrayed her as a young girl whose mother died suddenly and whose father didn't want her and was sent to an orphanage. And boy, my experience says people who have had that experience have a lot of stuff to work out. I mean, this is not just a small amount. They've got a lot that's lifelong struggle, But we didn't see that with her, just the alcohol and the drugs.
Well, there were some scenes where she's remembering the mother and, obviously the trauma of losing her, but you never see any real life impacts on her. Like, that's the thing. I hated that. And that, to me, that has everything to do with our feminist gynocentric storytelling culture, where you just can't show anything ugly in a woman. And like, exactly as you said, Paul, like, she doesn't have a fatal flaw, and that's the feminist narrative. Women don't have flaws, of course not. All she really has to do in the course of this story is to become herself, and it's the self she always was.
Very good.
There's no real struggle. She
Right.
simply has to, assume the full glory of who she really is. And you
Yes.
could say there's a little suggestion in the story that one of her flaws is that she's an intuitive chess player, and that she doesn't work at it in the way that most other chess geniuses do, where they're memorizing, various moves and strategies, and they work through games in their heads, and they read up on opening strategies and end game strategies. She doesn't do that so much. She just sort of, I don't know what she does. She feels the situation and sort of intuits what her next move should be. And that's presented as a flaw that she ultimately overcomes in that last game, when her friends help her to imagine all the possible scenarios that the number one Russian player may throw at her, and she goes through all the different strategies that she could use. But that's like, sort of, that's a typical feminist kind of approach to a woman's character. Women are intuitive, and that's this wonderful strength of theirs. Men, memorize things, and they do things in a very mechanical sort of way. And so what she ends up doing in the story is she uses her intuitive power, but then she also incorporates into that her masculine ways of knowing, and ultimately she synthesizes feminine and masculine to become, the queen in the story. And it's just so, I mean, it's so well, it's just such a lie. That's what really bothers me about it. And in everything throughout the whole film was like that. She's just so perfect and so beautiful. Her clothes are perfect. And even her weaknesses are presented as rather attractive. Wow, it would have been so much more interesting if she had actually gone through a period where she was losing, behaving badly, lost a friend as a result, ruined a relationship, really messed up, had a car accident, whatever it happens to be, something that would have humanized her in a real way. But that's never part of it.
Yeah.
Well, there was all that was, I think, sloppiness with the narrative of the storytelling in this. And one of the things that I'll point to is her friendship with the young black girl that she met in the orphanage, and who becomes sort of a caretaker of her in ways emotionally, and an oracle of truth for her. And they have several camera shots in there with the two women right next to each other, and they're just framed perfectly. And they do this 2 or 3 times throughout the series. And what they're saying is, here's the intersection. This is their dog whistle to intersectional feminists, that you have this black woman and this white girl, both oppressed, both connected by their oppression. But of course, it doesn't bother them later on that the young black woman becomes an attorney, gets into law school, and actually fucks one of her bosses to get a new car. And all of this is a you go girl kind of conversation.
Yeah.
And of course, feminists have never had a problem with the contradiction presented of trying to paint women as powerless, and then intentionally ignoring the vast social and sexual power that women possess in our society.
Yes.
And there's no dissonance there in the storytelling. It's just like, oh yeah, I'm powerless. I got this new car from fucking my boss. A true feminist story if I ever saw one.
Crazy. I can't believe that feminists liked this storyline too, because chess, the game of chess, is interesting in that the queen can die and you can still win. But the king cannot die. If you lose the king, you're out. You're finished. Not a good feminist narrative.
The queen on the chessboard is the one with all the power. The queen
There you
can
go.
move on every other piece except a knight, um, and she is critical. I
That's
mean,
right.
if you notice in one of the scenes, she gave up her queen real early, and the guy insisted that she resign. That her teacher insisted that she resign as a matter of sportsmanship because she shouldn't have given up her queen that early. I also thought it was interesting how they showed her playing without looking at the board. I actually had that happen once in life. I used to be an avid player in younger days, and I played a
Mm.
guy one time that this wasn't a chess champion. I mean, he was a really good player, but he didn't have some phenomenal rating, or he wasn't a tournament winner. He played me without looking at the board and slaughtered me every time.
God.
It was embarrassing, absolutely embarrassing. And I'm not a bad player, but I can still play
Humbled
pretty
already.
well. But this guy absolutely eviscerated me every time without looking at the board, and he couldn't compete with the people that they're portraying
Exactly.
in these movies.
Exactly.
He was just an average guy.
Precisely.
Well, step above average, but
Yes.
he wasn't as good as these chess masters. And
Yes.
Mhm.
and I never honestly, and again, I know that there's plenty of women in this world that could beat me at chess. I've never had a woman beat me though.
Hmm. I was
Just
thinking
never
about that
happened.
today. I think a woman beat me one time, but I can't. I think that happened. I'm not sure though. Usually not. Usually I didn't play women. Usually played men.
Janice, if you've
Mhm.
never played, I'll play you next.
Yeah, I've never played. My husband, who loved chess when he was younger, has been threatening for years to teach me to play, and I don't want to really learn because I know I'll be no good. It's not even something that interests me. I don't even think I could
Exactly.
remember all the different chess pieces and what they do. And I know I'd disappoint him in that sense. But he'd be too nice, of course, to say, as our heroine said to her boyfriend when he was trying to help her prepare for tournaments, that she found herself so impatient with his lack of mental agility that he couldn't understand what was obvious to her as she was thinking of moves and playing out the various moves that the pieces would make in her mind, that she found it repugnant that he couldn't follow her own brilliance, and that's seen as perfectly okay for her to say to him. And he goes on loving her, of course, and looking out for her and wanting the best for her. And that ultimately is, in a way, I think, what this movie, the thing that most bugged me about the movie, in a way, is that it is, like I said before, I think it's the benign feminist version of the woman's success story, in that it doesn't bang away constantly at the men are bad motif. Most of the men in the story are, pretty decent, or even more than decent,
Right.
and treat her very well and are appreciative of her talents and support her and everything. But and that's the message of the movie, I think. And it's a reason a lot of guys will like it, because of course a lot of guys want an end to the gender war and are tired of being told that they're lousy, that there's nothing good about them. And so this movie holds out the hope. This is how you bring an end to the gender war, is that you put women first, and you recognize that women are brilliant. And when a woman beats you in a traditionally masculine domain, you cheer her on and you happily take the back seat to her. And if she mistreats you in a love relationship or whatever, well, that's just because she's such a genius, and you're not going to be angry about that or have hurt feelings. You should never be resentful. And what you should do, you should devote your life to helping this superior specimen of humanity prove her superiority. I think that's the clear message of this film to men. This is what you have to do if you don't want to be hated. Be like one of these guys. Accept your second-class status and be happy in it. And I think
Great
it's kind of a
summary.
lousy message.
Great summary.
Fantastic.
That summed it up, boy.
Boy, it sure does.
Indeed.
And that was the feeling, Janice just put into words exactly what I was feeling as the
Yes.
credit rolled on the last episode
Yes.
of this, is we have been given our marching orders.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and
So
she's
true.
going to come out, that final scene where she's won. And, I mean, the movie is a total leftist kind of thing. I mean, all the things that are traditionally considered good have been traditionally considered good about America, the traditional family, its capitalist ethos, its individualist ethos, its anti-communism, all its Christianity, all those things get sneered at in the course of this. Like, we could do a whole other episode just about that. There's creepy Christian ladies who want to send this girl to Russia so she can proselytize for capitalism and against communism, which is atheistic, and we're supposed to laugh at these silly old biddies. And of course, our wonderful heroine isn't sure that she actually believes that Christianity is superior to atheistic communism. And that's so good. She's so bold in seeing the truth. And she goes to the Soviet Union. And of course, it's a wonderful place. And there's no suggestion that there's any repression going on, or anybody is starving, or that the life is drab, or that, one is living in terror of being yanked out of one's bed at 2 a.m. and taken off to a prison to be interrogated and tortured and sent to a gulag. All of that, of course, is just not there at all. And that final scene where there she is, the queen, and she gets out of the cab because she's with this horrible, pro-American minder who wants her, to become a spokesperson for the American way. And she leaves him behind and goes out and takes her place with all the old elderly men who are sitting out playing chess, in Moscow. And there she is in her white robes, looking like the queen that she is, and they welcome her with open arms. And isn't this wonderful? And this is this is a message against patriotism. It's a message against anti-communism. Like, it's all please, because there a single leftist note that wasn't struck in that final.
No, and all of it was just obviously gratuitous all the way through, from the beginning scene with the doll to that final scene with all the wonderful smiling Russian men who are just, they're so rich and have such great lifestyles. They have nothing better to do than to play chess. And they were all just awed of her. And those men that got up from their chairs and, do you want to play, and let me shake your hand and let me welcome you and smile for you. That's when you were talking about the marching orders we've been given. That's the behavior that they want to see out of us. And thank goodness for red pills, they're not going to get it from everybody.
Yeah.
Indeed. Are we there?
Well, I guess that's the final statement.
Another sad day of gynocentrism.
Well, I hope that, a lot of people will be inspired to take up chess again, but I suspect a lot more men than women will.
But the men better lose.
Yeah, more men than women will. And of course, that's toxic masculinity at play, and the oppression of patriarchy, because women, as we all know in the West, aren't allowed to play chess.
Right, exactly. Or they're told they'll never be any good at it.
Absolutely. As he twirls his mustache.
Indeed.
Yeah, but the fact of the matter is that men's minds work often in really quite amazing ways, and their love of chess and their affinity for it is one of the demonstrations of that. And I find that exciting and interesting.
Indeed. I'm with you on that one.
Speaking of men, I want to remind everybody, there's going to be a link below too, that we have we're pushing up on 200 men who have become members of Regarding Men. We're doing groups every day of the week, and on several days, multiple groups. And we have a cyber shed on top of that. These groups are going fantastic. If you've ever felt isolated because of your red pill beliefs, because of the way you view the world, because of the way you view women or politics or anything else, we invite you to follow the link below and become a part of this. Janice and Tom and I, like I said, we're hosting these meetings. There's other hosts too, and they're starting to grow. There's something for everybody, but most importantly, I just want to appeal to you guys who haven't tried Regarding Men to come on board and give it a shot, because you'll find that it really is where red pill isolation comes to die.
Lots of good stuff going on, including a humor group by Mike Buchanan. which is and
Yes,
we've got a
a
writers group, a
group,
humor group, a spirituality group, a relationships group. What else? Just all kinds of things going on. Come on and join us. It's good. And
You're gonna
men,
love it. Are men
Good.
are
I think am I frozen?
Men
I think I'm having trouble with my internet, but if you can hear me, men are good.
it's all the internet's fault.
It's all the internet's fault. Yes, it's patriarchy got her.
Men are good. Men are good, as is regarding men. And come see us on Regarding Men. We'll see you next time.
Take care,
Next
guys.
time.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.